All right, get ready to dive into something twisted. We're tackling Saw 6 today. You wanted to go deeper than just the blood and guts to figure out what makes this one tick. So buckle up, because even if horror isn't your thing, I think you'll find the themes in this one pretty intriguing.
Saw 6 is a fascinating choice, really. It's a bit of a litmus test for fans. Some think it's a return to form, while others see it as highlighting the franchise's flaws.
A real love it or hate it situation then. Okay, let's unpack this. For anyone needing a refresher, the Saw films revolve around Jigsaw, a mastermind with a penchant for deadly games designed to test people's will to live. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, our sources point out that Saw 6 specifically digs into a theme that hits close to home for a lot of us, the ethics of healthcare.
It's true. While the franchise is known for its gore, this installment directly ties its trademark traps to the protagonist's role as an insurance executive who makes a living denying life-saving care. The source highlights that this adds a layer of complexity, blurring the lines between who is truly guilty. Suddenly, we're forced to consider the system that grants such power, and that resonates with a lot of real-world anxieties people have about healthcare access.
So we're not just talking about victims trapped in a game, but potentially a whole system. Speaking of anxieties, our sources also pointed out some criticisms of the film. One that stuck out to me was the criticism around pacing, particularly the use of flashbacks. I felt like I was getting whiplash, jumping between gruesome traps and boardroom deals.
You're right to point out the flashback issue. The source specifically mentions how they disrupt the flow, and I agree that some traps feel shoehorned in. However, there's one trap, the carousel trap, that despite its brutality, offers a fascinating look at Jigsaw's philosophy. Or rather, the way the film seems to contradict it. It forces the protagonist to choose who lives and dies amongst his employees.
So it's less about them fighting for their survival and more about him playing judge, jury, and, well, executioner based on his own flawed decision-making.
Exactly. And that's where this trap transcends mere shock value. The source points out how the situation undercuts Jigsaw's whole mantra of making people appreciate life. It raises the question, if survival depends on someone else's arbitrary choice, is there really any free will at play?
It seems like Jigsaw might need to work on his brand messaging there. But this focus on flawed choices actually segues perfectly into another point our sources brought up: Mark Hoffman. He goes from Jigsaw's apprentice to something else entirely.
What's fascinating about Hoffman is his evolution from follower to a force in his own right. And he becomes a chilling example of how effective villains often straddle that line between confidence and desperation.
The source uses words like cold and brutal to describe him and points out how he gets even more terrifying as he tries to keep his secret under wraps.
The source specifically highlights the scene where the detectives close in on Hoffman. It's incredibly suspenseful, and for a moment, you forget about the gore because you're caught up in this cat-and-mouse chase. The film excels at building tension when it leans into that thriller aspect.
Okay, so we've got Hoffman on the rise. But our sources also pointed out that Saw 6 throws another player into the mix. Jill Tuck, Jigsaw's widow. She's not just mourning anymore, she's got her own game to play thanks to Jigsaw's final instructions. This leads to a pretty wild twist ending, which I won't spoil here. What did you make of her sudden shift to a more active role? Did it feel earned?
That's where I think the source's critique is spot on. Jill's transformation from passive observer to executor of Jigsaw's will does feel a bit rushed. It's like the writers wanted that shock value, but didn't fully lay the groundwork for such a drastic change in her character.
It does make you wonder what was going through her mind all those years, right? Maybe that's a deep dive for another time. But speaking of things that make you think, remember how we talked about the healthcare angle earlier? Well, the source we're looking at focused mostly on internal critiques of Saw 6, like the pacing issues and character inconsistencies. But there's this whole other layer. They missed the film's release date.
That's an excellent point. You can't ignore the context. Saw 6 hit theaters in 2009, right at the peak of the healthcare debate here in the U.S.
Wow, I totally missed that connection.
When you watch it through that lens, the film's commentary on profit versus human life takes on this whole other meaning. Suddenly, this outlandish horror flick becomes a distorted reflection of a very real and very raw societal anxiety.
Okay, now that's what I call food for thought. It's like watching the movie with a whole new level of understanding. It makes you realize that even with all the over-the-top gore and traps, there's a reason Saw 6 gets under your skin and sticks with you. Maybe that's part of its morbid brilliance.
Absolutely. It highlights how genre filmmaking, even horror, can be a vehicle for social commentary, even if it's not always intentional. It makes you question whether the real horror lies in the on-screen violence or the systems we grapple with in our own lives.
That actually reminds me of something else the source pointed out. Jill Tuck's actions in Saw 6 aren't just a shocking twist. They directly set up the events of the next film, Saw 3D. It's like the writers were playing a long game, planting seeds that wouldn't fully bloom until later.
Precisely. And I think that's something that often gets overlooked in discussions about individual Saw films. They're not isolated stories, they're pieces of a larger puzzle. You need to see how the pieces fit together to fully appreciate the bigger picture.
It makes you want to go back and watch them all again, doesn't it? Just to
Yes.
see all the ways they connect. But even on its own, Saw 6 gives us plenty to unpack. We've got the ethical dilemmas, the complex characters, and now this added layer of social commentary. It's more than just a gore fest, that's for sure.
I agree. And I think it speaks to our enduring fascination with moral questions, even when they're presented in such extreme circumstances. We're drawn to stories that make us question our own sense of right and wrong.
It's like Saw 6 isn't content with just scaring us, is it?
No, not
It
her.
wants to make us think too.
It's a horror film that aims for both the gut and the mind. And that's a potent combination.
No kidding. We've been diving deep into this one. The themes, the criticisms, that surprise connection to the healthcare debate back in '09. What stands out to you as the most impactful takeaway from all of this?
That's a good question. For me, I think it's the reminder that even the most outlandish horror can hold up a mirror to our own anxieties. Saw 6 might be over the top, sure, but its exploration of power, choice, and the price of survival. Those are things we grapple with every day, even if we don't have Jigsaw breathing down our necks.
Okay, now I'm thinking about Jigsaw while doing my taxes. Thanks for that. But seriously, you've made me appreciate this film on a whole other level. It's not just about the traps, it's about what those traps represent.
Precisely. And that's why Saw 6 sparks such debate, It's not afraid to push boundaries, even if it means sacrificing some narrative elegance along the way.
So for those listening who might be thinking of revisiting Saw 6, or maybe even watching it for the first time, what would you say they should watch out for?
Pay attention to the moments that make you uncomfortable beyond the gore, the ones that linger after the credits roll. Those are the moments where Saw 6 truly sinks its teeth in and leaves its mark.
Excellent advice. A huge thanks to you for guiding us through this wild ride. For everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time. And until then, stay curious.